I'll begin this speaking by asking a question. Who authorized authorization? We know what the word author means. It's the person that came up with the words that are put on paper or put in speech. Because words that are put in speech can be put on paper. That's called transcription. We know what these words mean, but the word authorized and unauthorized, well, who authorized authorization? We know who authorized the Constitution. We know who the writers of the Constitution were. And we still refer back to them, even though the times that weren't as free as they were put on paper in the Constitution at that time. But when laws were corrected, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution, all that was authorized under the names of the authors and referred back to the authors of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Okay, so who authorized authorization? That still remains unauthorized and therefore unconstitutional, because speech is, in the Bill of Rights, free speech. Number one, first thing needed to be added to the Constitution. Okay, so now I'm talking about uneasy speaking, because that's what I'm doing. What I'm speaking is uneasy to state because it is considered unauthorized, even though I, Robert Allen Burton, am authorizing these words I'm speaking, and I am an author. Therefore, I'll continue on with that, jumping right into what I want to discuss, and that is health knowledge. I'm a 50-year-old man about to turn 51, and my health is relatively good for my age, and my performance is proof of that in all physical acts that I perform. So therefore, my health knowledge is what's got me here. It hasn't been the care. I've had some help along the way with my health, and I'll tell you who helped me the most is an unauthorized medical professional. Unauthorized medical advisor was my Aunt Evelyn. One time I had strep throat. I was getting strep throat about every other year, and I would defeat it with antibiotics acquired through medical establishments. And, wonderful thing that antibiotics are, they work, but it was coming back about every 2 years. And strep throat was a serious thing. Well, one time I didn't have access to antibiotics and didn't have the money to pay for a doctor's visit, and I was talking to my mom asking if maybe she had some antibiotics, and my Aunt Evelyn happened to be there. My Aunt Evelyn was married to my Uncle Ralph, and he was deceased at this point, however. And my Aunt Evelyn was in her 80s, and she said, so my mom asked her, said, "Do you happen to have any antibiotics, Aunt Evelyn?" This is my mom's aunt, so my great aunt. In fact, side tangent, my mom was born at my Aunt Evelyn's house, so her health began there at that house. Well, my Aunt Evelyn said, well, in my day, if you had strep throat, what came to be known as strep throat, and you didn't defeat it naturally, you died. And that was her advice, and that was pretty hardcore, but this was coming from her personal experience, her health knowledge. Well, then I referred back to the home remedies that my mom applied in her childhood and my Aunt Evelyn had applied in her childhood, to gargle salt water continuously and try and soothe it that way. And that's what I did. And I beat the strep throat that way, and it didn't come back. It hasn't come back since. So I've gained a little bit of health knowledge about that and disease and immunity. When the body produces its own antibodies naturally, those antibodies were superior to the ones the antibiotics were able to produce. That's not to say antibiotics aren't lifesavers. They can be. But in this particular case, and through my Aunt Evelyn's advice, as unauthorized as it might have been, it was authored by her, and it worked, and it still continues today. So that's part of my health knowledge about disease and immunity. And so going on beyond that, let's consider the fact that when a lot of people from parts of the world go to Mexico and drink the water, they get sick. Okay, well, that's because they haven't developed a particular immunity to that water and that bacteria. But once they do, it's obviously not the problem with nature and the disease itself as part of nature. It is a problem with the particular systems not having been exposed to that bacteria and developed immunity to it. So given the health knowledge I've learned, I've come to find out that hiding from the bacteria and disease is not what I have found to be the best way to combat the bacteria. I'm not going to be able to wipe out all the bacteria from the earth. So therefore, not hiding from it and proceeding through life in a rather constitutional way of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, I've been able to become rather strong in my immunity system. Okay, now I'll get into a potential health conspiracy. If that is the case, which it is shown to be in my life. Okay, well, that comes into conflict with medical education systems that come up with the idea of isolation away from bacteria and trying to live a sterile life. I think, well, if that's medical advisement at some point, and especially in the COVID lockdown, that was the advice, to stay clear of the bacteria itself, and that would be the best way. Well, a lot of doctors agreed with that. Some doctors didn't, and the ones that didn't were silenced. Some of them were actually removed from their jobs. And let's think about what for me to be speaking against the medical establishment, doctors. Well, I'll say frankly that a lot of doctors are fucking idiots, quite frankly, and I'll go on to say that education is not a test of intelligence. Education is, to a point, a test of obedience, because blindly listening to advice of your higher speaker in the system of authorized education, even though we haven't yet determined who authorized authorization, is not going to allow you to advance in your education. So you have to accept the teachings that you're given. It's indoctrination is the word for that, and that's you. And if you're not indoctrined, you can't become a doctor. Well, so if you go against that, in your life in pursuit of happiness might require you to go against that. So then sometimes people have to develop sneaky intelligence, which means you pretend to be accepting all the facts you're given, but in the back of your mind you're carrying, I'm only going to accept this to get past this guard that's keeping me from proceeding forward in my course of life. So, proceeding forward in my course of life and speaking and my free speech, I'm going to go on to say that a potential conspiracy to wipe out a bunch of people could be, let's say, isolate everybody away from all bacteria and each other for the most part. You can't really isolate people from all their family members in their household, so let's isolate the households and each household be isolated from other households, and do that for about 2 years, and then lift it, and then everybody gets sick because they haven't had exposure to any bacteria for all this time, or hardly any, except from their own family members, and then you might wipe out about a third of the population. That's just purely speculation, mathematically, but it's not purely speculative in what my understanding of health knowledge is. But then comes in the conflict. Well, people were isolated for not the full 2 years, but over 1 year this lockdown took place. And when the lockdowns were lifted, it didn't wipe out a third of the population. So that seems apparently to shoot that theory all to hell. But let's consider this. How successful was the lockdown? How much did people really lock down and stick to the lockdown the way it was advised that they stick to it? Well, along with sneaky intelligence is also sneaky behavior. And It could be that there were some unsung heroes during the lockdown that saved their families. And these unsung heroes could have been fathers that came home an hour late from work one day. Unexplained and maybe even unexcused, but it could be that some unsung heroes of the lockdown visited prostitutes on the way home and became exposed to bacteria. So there may be families that will never know the sacrifice that their fathers made to them that saved the whole family from death by visiting that hooker on the street corner. Could be. And now, let's not leave the women out. There could be mothers who also saved their whole families by having sex with the Amazon delivery guy when the father wasn't home. And if you don't know these are jokes, and if you don't find this funny, then they weren't jokes and they weren't funny. And let's consider that. Go on. Let's consider why these words aren't acceptable to be released. Is it because I'm a super idiot, meaning that I'm so dumb and so stupid that my stupidity could be contagious? That even though everything I'm saying is unfounded in any sort of logic whatsoever, it's still somehow so powerful that intelligent people are going to become idiots because they heard me speak. Is that possible? Or is it because I'm illegally funny? I'm so funny that that the laughter could be contagious. And that's just too much. Or, third possibility, I'm Uncle Sam in chains, baby. Have a good day.